Good morning. Thank you for being here with us for History Matters and So Does Coffee. I'm Grace Leatherman, Executive Director of the National Council for History Education, and we are so delighted to be here with Joanne Freeman. And she was unable to be here live, but she wanted to make sure that she brought her message to you all this morning. So Joanne, thank you so much for being here live from Yale. And we're going to hand it over to you for a wonderful discussion of John Adams. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Grace. And particularly, I thank Grace for being here because she, if you couldn't tell, is losing her voice. So all told, we are here in a tribute to the History Matters community. And as Grace suggested, first off, yes, I'm sitting, so I'm now, unlike most Friday mornings, I'm in my office at Yale. I'm not going to turn the computer around because it's a little frightening everywhere else. So as with my home, I've put us in the location that looks most impressive, but I apologize for the echo. I apologize for any hallway noises or whatever else happens. The point is, I am here and I do want to have a brief discussion about something timely and yet something historical, as we do on the History Matters community. And as Grace suggested, I do want to talk about John Adams, and particularly I want to talk about John Adams's actions in relation to the trial of the British soldiers involved with the Boston Massacre. Now, I thought of this for what might seem, and probably should seem to many, obvious reasons. John Adams in the last week or so has been he's having a moment. And given that I always say that John Adams is the Rodney Dangerfield of the founding, because he always felt that he doesn't have any respect. And which is true. You know, he always sort of felt like no one gives me credit, right? Everyone gives Thomas Jefferson credit. I'm just going to change my view here. There we go. He once complained that Jefferson, the lone man at his desk, staying up all night writing the Declaration. It's like Jefferson has what Adams called the scenery of the business behind him, right? All the theater. Jefferson has all the theater. No one will ever give me credit. And you'll hear him say by the end of my comments, I guess this morning to you, this afternoon to me, something along those lines about what he did in relation to the Boston Massacre. The reason why I'm bringing this up today is because there's been a lot said about the recent Supreme Court confirmation hearings regarding Ketanji Brown Jackson, and some Republicans have been attacking her for being a public defender, right? And claiming that the fact that she would defend criminals, defend terrorists, somehow disqualifies her for being a Supreme Court justice. And that on many, many levels is a bad argument. It's not in good faith, even as an argument. It's just a silly argument. Using John Adams for it is why, number one, public defenders are important. Number two, why defense attorneys are important, and why particularly having lawyers stand up and defend people who seemingly committed horrible crimes is vitally important to American democracy, to the rule of law, to many things that are pretty foundational to what we value in the United States. So speaking out against these things, that's pretty much speaking out against democracy on a certain level. So let me talk a little bit about the Boston Massacre and about what John Adams did, because he had a very clear sense of what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. He knew the importance of what he was doing. And historians are thankful for the fact that he said so on paper. We always like when that happens. So, okay, let me talk a little bit, set things up for the Boston Massacre. Now, first off, it's important to know that between late 1768 and 1770, already there were tensions in Boston. There was even previous physical confrontations of one kind and another between soldiers and Bostonians. So the Boston Massacre came, as so many things do, in a broader historical context, had a deeper meaning. In this case, tensions had been building between the colonists and troops in Boston that in response to the various acts and responses to the acts that the Parliament had been passing in relation to the colonies, particularly in Boston. There had been a lot of reaction, and British troops had been sent to Boston to keep things calm. And a lot of people, including, I believe, if I remember correctly, I didn't look this up, but I think Abigail Adams even says that they felt in some way that they were under guard by British troops. It was very much, people in Boston felt that there were troops kind of watching over them. And of course, British troops, they're still British. So I say that, but I don't mean to be, when people claim that Paul Revere said, the British are coming, it's a problem because he was British. Same thing here, right? But they didn't like soldiers. They did not appreciate the fact that there had been soldiers sent in some way to suppress or restrain or control the people of Boston. So in early 1770, there were a few outbursts of hostility before the famous one between townspeople and soldiers in Boston. So, for example, on March 2nd, 1770, Samuel Gray, a rope maker, asked a passing soldier if he wanted a job. And when the soldier, who probably was an underpaid soldier, like most of them were, said, yeah, actually, he would be happy to have a second job and to earn some extra money, Gray laughed and said, okay, go clean out my outhouse. Now, there, the soldier attacked Gray, or probably punched him or some such thing. And soon other soldiers and other dock workers came over, and there was actually a little bit of a rumble over this moment. A few days later, on March 5th, another fight broke out in which a civilian said something insulting to a soldier, and it caused another fight. And that would be the first in a series of agitated clashes that would take place on March 5th, 1770, that end in the confrontation that later came to be called the Boston Massacre. Now, that night, the night of March 5th, a small boy began taunting a soldier who knocked him down. And the boy complained to other colonists that a soldier had knocked him down and actually pointed out the soldier who had knocked him down. And according to one account, let me see if I get this correct. I didn't look it up before this. I believe he says, points to the soldier and says to the colonist something like, there's the damn fool that knocked me down, or something like that, which is just one of those moments that humanizes the past, even something not quite mythologized, but, the Boston Massacre, all in capital letters. So the boy taunts the soldier knocks him down, the boy complains to other colonists that he's been knocked down. A small group gathers around the boy. Some, in relation to what he said, tried to charge into the main barracks where the soldiers were based to accost the soldiers, but guards held them off. Now, at some point in here, someone rang the bell of the Boston Meeting House, probably seeing people trying to break into the barracks and having a sense that something was going on in the street. Normally, the ringing of the bell was a signal for fire. And not surprisingly, fires were a big threat in early America. Everything was wood. So if a fire starts, you could level blocks and blocks and blocks of a city. So when the bell is rung, dozens and dozens of people rushed into the street to see what was going on. Now, British General Thomas Gage, who was commander-in-chief of the British Army in America, wrote back home, had to write back home after what happened, about what he says happened before the actual massacre. I want to read you his words, probably because you haven't heard them before, and because they, at least in some sense, give you an idea of what was happening in the street. Clearly, what you're going to hear is he thinks that the colonists were behaving insolent and violently, that they were deliberately doing things to get the guards upset and to provoke them into being violent. So he's entirely blaming the colonists for causing what ends up being an ugly moment. So this is what Gage wrote back home to defend and explain himself. He said, this is right when the bell rings. He says, many people came out of their houses supposing a fire in the town, and several officers on the same supposition were repairing to their posts, but meeting with mobs were reviled, attacked, and those who could not escape knocked down and treated with great inhumanity, right? These crude colonials. Different mobs paraded through the streets, passing the several barracks and provoking the soldiers to come out. One body went to the main guard, where every provocation was given without effect, for the guard remained quiet. From thence, the mob proceeded to a sentinel posted upon the custom house at a small distance from the guard and attacked him. He defended himself as well as he could, calling out for help, and people ran to the guard to give information of his danger. Captain Preston, hearing the sentinel was in danger of being murdered, detached a sergeant and 12 men to relieve him, and soon, after following himself to prevent any rash act on the part of the troops, moved ahead. And this party, as well as the sentinel, I've been teaching all day, guys, so I'm a little not quite as articulate as I always am, was immediately attacked, some colonists throwing bricks, stones, pieces of ice, and snowballs at them, whilst others advanced up to their bayonets and endeavored to close with them, to use their bludgeons and clubs, calling out, "Fire if you dare," and provoking them to it by the most opprobrious language, right? Again, those crude colonials. So here we are, the evening of March 5th, 1770. Ultimately, there are 8 British soldiers led by Captain Thomas Preston, and they're confronting a crowd of angry Bostonians. It's unclear what happened next. Some say that Preston said to fire. Preston himself at his trial, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, said, "I was standing between the soldiers and the crowd. So if I said fire, I would have been shot." So I don't think I said fire. It's maybe one of the 8 soldiers fired and others assumed there'd been a command to fire. There's a lot of discussion about this during the trial. One way or another, what ultimately happened was Preston's soldiers fired into the crowd. 5 colonists died, including Crispus Attucks, a man of Native American and African American descent. Okay, so Boston already upset about the fact that the soldiers were there. Then there's this confrontation, and Bostonians are killed by, first of all, the soldiers that aren't wanted, but soldiers that are their own. It's not a foreign country's soldiers, right? They are British. These are British soldiers. So on a bunch of levels, the town is in an uproar. Adams, who at the time is a 35-year-old lawyer, agrees, steps forward and says he will defend Preston and his soldiers. Actually, the day after the massacre, he steps up and says, "I will defend them." And he reflected on that decision I had no hesitation in answering that counsel ought to be the very last thing that an accused person should want in a free country. That the bar ought, in my opinion, to be independent and impartial at all times and in every circumstance, and that persons whose lives were at stake ought to have the counsel they preferred. But he must be sensible. This would be as important a cause as ever was tried in any court or country of the world because of the precedent being set, and that every lawyer must hold himself responsible not only to his country, but to the highest and most infallible of all tribunals for the part he should act. So he's stating right off the cuff, it matters that I'm stepping forward to do this for these soldiers, despite the fact that Adams very much was part of the Patriot cause at this point. So it's not as though he agrees with them or what they were doing, but he feels that the principle behind this is very important. And so that's why he steps forward. So it was determined early on that there should be 2 separate trials, and that Captain Preston should have 1 trial, and then the 8 soldiers should have a 2nd trial. So Preston's trial for murder comes first, and Adams leads a very vigorous defense of Preston. He calls 22 different witnesses in one day. There's a merchant who said he had his hand on Preston's shoulder and didn't hear a command to fire. 3 witnesses, actually all of them Black, 2 slaves and a free man, gave testimony that they didn't hear any order to fire. They also testified that they saw the crowd pelting the soldiers with snowballs, which I should say often were filled with rocks. So these aren't mere snowballs. And on October 30th, Preston was acquitted, not guilty. The 2nd trial begins in November of 1770, even more dramatic. It lasted 7 days. There were more than 80 witnesses testifying. And Adams gave a rousing 2-day closing on December 3rd, 1770, in which he really is giving a rousing defense to these soldiers, right? He's being a zealous defendant of these soldiers. He characterized the patriotic protest, despite the fact that personally he believed in their cause. he said, this crowd confronting the soldiers, they certainly seemed as though they would be dangerous. Anyone could have assumed that they were in danger because of that crowd. So this is Adams. He says, we have been entertained with a great variety of phrases to avoid calling this sort of people a mob. Some call them shavers. Some call them geniuses. The plain English is, gentlemen, most probably a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues and outlandish jack tars. And why we should scruple to call such a set of people a mob, I can't conceive unless the name is too respectable for them. So he's not holding it back, right? Adams is like really out there making an argument. He also portrayed Preston and the soldiers as acting with restraint and that they were acting in self-defense. He said, would it have been a prudent resolution in them or in anybody in their situation to have stood still to see if the sailors and others would knock their brains out or not? Had they not all the reason in the world to think that as they had done so much, they would proceed further? And Adams ended his closing with a kind of more philosophical entreaty, which I read partly because the first part of it is something that we should quote over and over and over again. You should be putting it out there on social media. People should be saying it all the time in the contemporary political climate, because what Adams starts out by saying is, facts are stubborn things. Thank you, John Adams. He says, facts are stubborn things. And whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence, nor is the law less stable than the fact. If an assault was made to endanger their lives, the law is clear. They had a right to kill in their own defense. So after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted 6 of the soldiers on all charges. 2 of them, who clearly were proven to have fired at the crowd, were found guilty of manslaughter. Now, Adams continued, as he was prone to do, to reflect on his continued belief in his own correctness in taking the case, and he was very frustrated at the fact that he was criticized for it, right? He didn't get any respect, was criticized for what he had done. And here is from later on, thinking back to what he did for these soldiers after the Boston Massacre. He said, to this hour, my conduct in it is remembered and is alleged against me to prove I am an enemy to my country and always have been. It was one of those cases of which I could give you the history of many, in which my head or my heart, or perhaps a conspiracy of both, compelled me to differ in opinion from all my friends, to set at defiance all their advice, their remonstrances, their raillery, their ridicule, their censures, and their sarcasms, without acquiring one symptom of pity from my enemies. So everyone came out against me for doing this. But as he had already said, it was vital that someone step forward to do this. It was a matter of principle. It was a matter of justice. Someone needed to give these men a defense. He didn't say this, but I'll come back to this in a moment. That's the meaning of the rule of law. Everyone deserves a fair trial. Everyone is equal under the law. Around the same time that he wrote that, Adams wrote in his diary that that defense was one of his proudest achievements, and that he, because he was upholding the rule of law, was a safeguard against mob rule. So Adams wrote, the part I took in defense of Captain Preston and the soldiers procured me anxiety and obloquy enough. It was, however, one of the most gallant, generous, manly, and disinterested actions of my whole life, and one of the best pieces of service I ever rendered my country. Judgment of death against these soldiers would have been as foul a stain upon this country as the executions of the Quakers or witches anciently. So what he is saying is that by standing up for what is essentially the rule of law, he he did something vitally important for his country. He stood up for something, committed himself to this principle that needed defense. The rule of law, the idea that people are equal under the law, that we have rights under the law, that people are due a fair trial. These are basic aspects of any kind of small d democratic society, any kind of government that has a democratic component in it. And although the United States isn't the United States yet in 1770, that principle continues, right? It ends up in one way or another moving its way into the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The idea that the rule of law and democracy provides that American citizens are due fair trials, are due representation by counsel, by the counsel of their choice. I don't have the text of the Sixth Amendment in front of me. I should have gotten it, but at any rate, that's basically what it says. People have a right to be tried at the place where the crime was committed, not hauled off to some place where they're not known. During the Revolution, there was even discussion of taking colonists who violated the various strictures that were being passed at the time, taking them to an admiralty court or taking them to England for their trial, which obviously is a way of making their trial less fair than it might have been. Sixth Amendment says no, none of that. And people are due counsel to defend their case. So you can see many ways in which during the Revolution, in the writing of the Constitution, and forever after, the idea of the rule of law, that we are all equal under the law, is vital. Now, I'm not saying that that idea works perfectly in our society. It doesn't, right? And we see all the time ways in which the legal system operates differently very often for white people and people of color. We see that all the time. That actually is part of what critical race theory is about. It's about structural components of society in which things are structured in one way or another and acted out in one way or another, so that of white people structurally because of the way the system works. So if you're interested in critical race theory, Heather Cox Richardson and I had a whole episode on it in our podcast Now and Then. I encourage you to go listen to it. One of the points we make is that it's not about racism. It's not about individuals. It says nothing about how people should feel about their race. It's actually about systems. And it's taught mostly in law school. But regardless of that, the point is, from the Revolution beyond, the idea of the rule of law, the idea of our rights to a fair trial are vital, are central. And we can sit here and say, if you think about a democratic mode of government, you can say free and fair elections, the accountability of people with power, and the rule of law are central components of that. So when people, members of Congress, stand up and say about a candidate for the Supreme Court that the fact that she was a public defender speaks against her because she would willingly defend a terrorist, that, first of all, is rhetoric, is appealing to the feelings of the base. But the fact of the matter is, what that person would be doing by defending a terrorist in a trial would be upholding the rule of law and would be part of a democratic mode of government. So those arguments being tossed out, and still, I believe there was another one yesterday that I'm sure I tweeted about, again, claiming that that Ketanji Brown Jackson, probably would have gone to the Nuremberg trials to defend the Nazis. Now, I'm not even going to talk about the whys, whats, and hows of that. The point is, she would have even been willing to defend those horrible criminals. Well, those horrible criminals deserved a fair trial, and that was discussed at the time. And people on the side of democracy and right understood the significance of the precedent being set and wanted the Nazis to have a fair trial. So I'm obviously very passionate about this because those kinds of statements, speaking out against public defenders and public defense and defending criminals and trials, are inherently anti-democratic and need to be recognized as such. So often here on History Matters, I ask people to pay attention. I ask you and everyone else to think about what emotions people are trying to arouse in some of what they're saying. And here again, this is entirely based on emotion, and I think that, as I used on another occasion, rage harvesting, right? I'm going to say this, get people upset, and then they will come with me because they will be upset. But that when you actually think about what's being said, it makes no sense and is inherently anti-democratic. So if you're pitching that kind of an argument, you certainly they saying about their understanding of the rule of law. So I think I will stop there. I have no idea how long I've been talking, and I don't have you guys there. And this is always weird to do without my community here, without all of us here. But my larger point here stands. I wanted to give John Adams his moment because he clearly was very proud of what he had done, and for good reason, because public defenders and the defense of criminals under the rule of law is central to what we believe in for our society. And although it might not be perfectly lived up to right now, it's an ideal that we can strive for. And the fact that that exists is vitally important. So I guess I will end my comments there. I will wish everybody a good week. I have no idea how it works when this appears when you will see this on Friday morning. Maybe you'll all be there together in some way. And I have no idea. Grace knows more than I do. I just know that what this means is that we still have not missed a week in one way or another. I think, see, no one is here. Carolee isn't here. I think this is the 104th episode, maybe.
Or fifth.
Or fifth. See, I need people. There's no mug. Oh no, I didn't even think about this. I have no mug in this office. I'm so sorry. If I thought of that, oh, wait a minute. I have my coffee cup and it is transparent, as should be the rule of law and its application.
Yes.
I'm trying. At any rate, everyone have a good week. Stand up for what's right. Keep your eyes open. Thank you for engaging in democracy with me being a little bit tired on a Wednesday afternoon. I don't even know what day it is at this point. And I will see you guys all like as normal next Friday morning.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And thank you so much from all of us here at NCHE.
Happy to be here, always for a good cause. So yay, NCHE History Matters community. And I'm sorry, Newbie couldn't take part. He'll let me know when I get home, probably. Okay, everybody, have a good week.